Ladies and gentlemen, there are wounds that do not bleed, and there are loves that do not speak. There are people who walk into your life, shake the walls of your soul, and leave without ever confessing what they felt. They looked at you like someone starving looks at water. They stayed near you like a shadow that could not bear to leave. They cared in ways so quiet that only the heart could hear it. And yet, when the moment came to speak, they chose silence. They swallowed the truth. They buried the feeling. They put a mask on their face and called it strength. But let me tell you something tonight. Silence is not always emptiness. Sometimes silence is the loudest confession a human being will ever make. You thought they did not love you. You thought they were indifferent. You thought maybe you imagined the signs, the hesitation in their voice, the tenderness in their eyes, the way they remembered small details, the way they appeared when you were falling apart. But what if they loved you deeply and simply lacked the courage to say it? What if their heart was a burning house and their mouth was too afraid to open the door? What if the love was there all along, but fear stood at the gate like a soldier refusing passage? Ladies and gentlemen, human beings are not only made of love. We are also made of fear, memory, shame, pride, insecurity, childhood wounds, and the masks we wear to survive. A person may love you with all their soul and still never speak. Why? Because speaking is exposure. Speaking is risk. Speaking is standing naked before another heart and saying, "Here I am, please do not destroy me." And many people would rather remain silent than face that danger. We are taught from a young age to be careful with our feelings. We are taught to smile when we are hurting, to be strong when we are broken, to stay composed when our heart is trembling. We learn to hide our pain so well that eventually we begin hiding our love too. And then one day the person we adore becomes a memory, and we are left with the terrible knowledge that we loved them, but never dared to say it aloud. That is one of the most tragic forms of human suffering, because unspoken love does not disappear. It transforms. It becomes regret. It becomes longing. It becomes the endless replay of what should have been said. It becomes the sentence that lives in the mind years later. I should have told them. And that sentence can haunt a person for the rest of their life. There is something deeply human about this tragedy. We often imagine love as bold, but in reality, love is often trembling. We imagine passion as loud, but sometimes passion is mute. We imagine the heart as brave, but the heart is also frightened. It fears rejection. It fears humiliation. It fears being seen too clearly. Because once someone knows what they mean to you, you are no longer safe in the old way. You are vulnerable. You are open. You have handed them the power to wound you. And so people hide. They hide behind jokes. They hide behind distance. They hide behind loyalty to the wrong life. They hide behind the role of friend, colleague, brother, sister, acquaintance, because the role feels safer than the truth. They stand close enough to feel your warmth, but not close enough to risk the fire. And yet the heart does not obey logic as easily as the mind pretends it does. A person can laugh with you and still be breaking inside because they want to say your name in a way that would change everything. A person can act casual while their chest is filled with a storm. A person can move through your life as if they are unaffected while secretly carrying you in every quiet moment. They may sleep, eat, work, speak, and smile, but beneath the surface there is a private world where you live constantly. This is the hidden tragedy of many souls. They love in secret and suffer in silence. And why? Because to confess love is not only to express a feeling. It is to risk the loss of the image they have built of themselves. It is to admit need. It is to surrender the illusion of control. It is to say, "You matter to me more than I can safely manage." For many, that is unbearable. Pride is a powerful prison. It tells the heart, "Do not expose yourself." Fear whispers, "If they do not feel the same, you will be ruined." Wounded memory says, Remember the last time you opened your heart. Remember what happened. And so the person remains silent, not because the feeling is small, but because the feeling is too large to contain. Sometimes they loved you quietly for years. They noticed the way your mood changed before you spoke. They remembered your favorite song, your favorite tea, your tired eyes, the days you were pretending to be fine. They saw what others overlooked. They admired you from a distance, and in that distance their love became pure but painful. Because love without expression does not grow in freedom, it grows in imagination. And imagination can become a beautiful torture. They imagine what your laughter would sound like if it were directed at them in a different world. They imagine walking beside you without fear. They imagine being honest. They imagine telling you everything. Then reality returns, and with it returns the cage. There are people who have carried this secret for so long that it became part of their identity. They are not simply someone who loved you. They are someone who never got to become the version of themselves that could have spoken. And this is where the soul suffers in a deeper way, not only from the love itself, but from the unlived life surrounding it. Because every unspoken truth creates a shadow life. In that shadow life, the confession was made, the hand was held, the tears were shared, the relationship was born, the pain was faced, the truth was honored. But in the real world, nothing was said, nothing happened. The moment passed, the door closed. And the soul is left with the unbearable knowledge of all the lives it might have lived. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why the silence of love can be more heartbreaking than rejection itself. Rejection at least gives you closure. Rejection gives form to pain. Silence gives no shape. It leaves the heart in suspension. It makes the soul ask endless questions. Did they love me? Did I matter? Was it real? Was I imagining it? Why did they look at me like that? Why did they stay? Why did they leave? Why did they not speak? The mind cannot rest because there is no final answer. And here is the cruelest part. Sometimes the one who never said it loved you the most. Not the one who said beautiful words and vanished. Not the one who made promises with no depth. Not the one who performed affection as a game. But the one who stayed quiet because the feeling was too sacred, too frightening, too powerful, too dangerous to risk. They loved you in the way some people pray. Privately, intensely, and without witness. Yet love that never becomes truth can turn into pain. It can become obsession. It can become regret. It can become the ghost that follows a person through every later relationship. They meet new people, but the heart is not fully available. Something remains locked in the room where your memory lives, and all the future connections must pass through that old silence. This is the psychology of unfinished love. Human beings do not only grieve what they have lost, they grieve what was never allowed to happen. They grieve the potential, the possibility, the almost. And almost is sometimes more painful than never, because almost means the heart got close enough to feel the shape of happiness, but not close enough to keep it. A Jungian understanding of this would tell us that the unconscious does not forget. What we repress returns. What we refuse to speak often lives in symbolic form. It appears in dreams, in longing, in repeated patterns, in attractions we cannot explain, in the people we are drawn to again and again. The soul tends to circle around its unfinished story until it is finally understood. That is why some people cannot forget you. Not because you were merely attractive, not because you were merely kind, but because you touched something deep inside them that they had never properly named. You became a symbol, a presence, a mirror, a possibility. You awakened their hidden self. And once the unconscious has been stirred, it does not settle easily. They may tell themselves, "It is over." but the heart says otherwise. They may say, "I moved on," but the shadow says, "Not entirely." They may smile at others, date others, live with others, but one part of them still stands at the door of the moment they never crossed. This is why love and fear are so often entangled. We think people fail to confess because they do not care enough, but often they care too much. They fear that the truth will destroy what little closeness already exists. They fear losing access to you altogether. They fear making things awkward. They fear damaging your respect. They fear looking foolish. They fear hearing no. They fear that once spoken, the feeling becomes real in a way that cannot be controlled. So they choose the lesser pain, silence. But silence is not lesser, it is simply slower. The pain of silence arrives later, often years later, when the person realizes they have spent their whole life guarding a truth that was meant to be lived. Then comes the bitter understanding that they protected themselves from one wound and created another. They avoided possible rejection and guaranteed lifelong regret. That is the human condition in one sentence. We often sabotage our own happiness because we confuse caution with wisdom. We believe that what is unspoken is safer, but safety is not the same as life. A life without risk is not a life fully lived. A heart without vulnerability is not a heart that has truly participated in existence. And love, if it is to be real, demands a cost. It demands the courage to be seen. There are people who never tell you the truth, not because they are weak in every way, but because they are wounded in one very specific place. They were once made to feel that love is dangerous. Perhaps they grew up in homes where affection was conditional, where emotions were mocked, where tenderness was punished, where longing was never answered. So as adults, when they feel something real, they do not know how to hold it openly. They retreat into the old architecture of survival, and survival says, do not confess, do not need, do not expose, do not ask. But the soul says, I am tired of hiding. That is the conflict within so many people, the conflict between what keeps them safe and what makes them alive. The safe path may preserve the body, the reputation, the image, the role, but the alive path asks for risk, heartbreak, and honesty. It asks for a leap across the abyss with no guarantee of landing, and many stand at that edge forever. They look at you from the other side and never jump. Do not misunderstand me. I am not glorifying silence. I am not romanticizing fear. I am revealing its power. Because unless we understand why people remain silent, we will keep misreading their lives. We will keep thinking that quiet means indifference. We will keep assuming that distance means lack of feeling. We will keep believing that those who say nothing have nothing to say. But sometimes the heart is so full that words break under the pressure. Sometimes the mouth cannot carry what the soul knows. Sometimes the emotion is too sacred to be easily converted into speech, not because it should never be spoken, but because the person speaking has not yet become strong enough to bear the consequences. There is a terrible loneliness in loving someone without confession. You become a keeper of your own secret. You become the only witness to your own tenderness. You look normal to the world, but inside you are carrying a whole kingdom of unexpressed feeling, and no one applauds that. No one sees the tears you did not cry in public. No one sees the battles fought in the mind. No one sees the countless times you almost told the truth, and then stopped. That kind of love can make a person feel invisible to themselves. Because every hidden truth eats a little piece of your aliveness. Every time you say nothing when there is everything, the soul learns to split itself in two. One part speaks the approved language of the world. The other part lives in secret. Over time, this split becomes painful. A person can no longer tell where honesty ends and performance begins. This is why unspoken love often leads to a haunted life. They may become brilliant at appearing unaffected. They may become the kind of person others call strong, composed, mature, unbothered. But strength can sometimes be another word for unprocessed sorrow. Composure can sometimes be another name for emotional exile. Maturity can sometimes be a beautiful mask placed over a ruined dream. And the saddest thing is that many people praise the mask and never ask about the face beneath it. But the face beneath it is where the truth lives. Ladies and gentlemen, there is another layer to this mystery. Sometimes the person who never said, "I love you," was not protecting only their own heart. Sometimes they were protecting the idea of you. They loved you so much that they feared making you ordinary through confession. They feared that saying it would collapse the fantasy. They feared that if the truth was brought into daylight, it would lose its magic. So they chose the distance of reverence. They loved you from the altar of silence. You remained a sacred image in their inner world, untouched by the complications of reality. In that sense, their silence was both devotion and fear. But devotion without courage can become stagnation. What is worshipped from afar is not the same as what is loved in the world. The soul must eventually decide whether it wants to preserve a fantasy or risk a reality. Most people are afraid of reality. Reality demands reciprocity. Reality can say yes or no. Reality can disappoint. Fantasy does not refuse us. Fantasy only comforts us. But there is no life in a fantasy that never becomes flesh. There is no shared future in a love that exists only in one mind. There is only the endless suspension of possibility. That is why so many hearts remain unfulfilled. They confuse the beauty of feeling with the courage of expression. To feel deeply is not yet to love fully. To love fully is to become willing to lose something in order to honor the truth. This is where many fail. They can feel, they can ache, they can dream, but they cannot cross the line into vulnerability. And so the entire vast world of their emotion remains trapped behind the prison wall of restraint. Some of the most painful words in the human language are these: "I almost told you." Almost is a graveyard. Almost is where dreams go to die quietly. Almost is where love becomes memory before it ever becomes relationship. But even now, even after all this pain, there is something noble in it. There is something profoundly human in the fact that people are capable of loving so deeply that their fear can barely contain it. Yes, fear can mute love. Yes, fear can distort love. Yes, fear can imprison love, but the very existence of such silence tells us the feeling was real. You do not remain silent over nothing. You do not suffer for years over something trivial. You do not carry a name in your heart with that much weight, unless the feeling has roots deep in the soul. So when you think of the ones who loved you but never said it, do not think only of what you did not receive. Think also of the burden they carried. Think of the nights they rehearsed impossible conversations. Think of the moments they looked at you and knew they were standing before a turning point in their life. Think of the courage they lacked. Think of the fear that won. Think of the inner war they fought and lost. This does not excuse the silence, but it explains the human behind it. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson here. People are rarely as simple as they appear. The one who said nothing may have been full of love. The one who seemed calm may have been in chaos. The one who walked away may have been too afraid to stay and be seen. The one who looked strong may have been desperately fragile. The human soul is a complicated house, and every room contains contradictions. That is why we must be careful when we judge silence. Sometimes silence is cold. Sometimes silence is cruel. But sometimes silence is a wound that never found language. And when love cannot find language, it can still find expression through presence, sacrifice, attention, restraint, and memory. The person may never say the words, but their life may bend around you in ways you never fully noticed. They may show up when no one else does. They may protect your peace. They may choose your comfort over their own confession. They may leave rather than burden you with their truth. They may do all of this while dying quietly inside. Would that be strength? Would that be weakness? Maybe it is both. Maybe the human heart is strongest where it is most afraid, and weakest where it is most honest. Maybe love and pain are not opposites but companions. Maybe every great feeling contains the seed of its own sorrow. Maybe we are built in such a way that what we desire most is also what we fear most, because to love is to lose control. And the ego, that proud little ruler of the conscious mind, hates losing control. The ego wants certainty, the ego wants security, the ego wants guarantees before commitment. But love does not offer guarantees. Love asks for trust, and trust is unbearable to the fearful soul. So the fearful soul says, not now, then later, then maybe, then one day, too late. That is how entire destinies are lost. Not in one dramatic collapse, but in 1,000 postponed truths. A message never sent, a call never made, a confession never spoken, a hand never reached for, a moment never seized, and then the years pass, and the heart is left to live in the museum of its own missed chances. Ladies and gentlemen, listen carefully. The heart remembers everything that the mouth refused to say. It remembers the first time they saw you. It remembers the first time they felt the pull. It remembers the moment they knew it was dangerous. It remembers the long days of pretending. It remembers the nights of wishing. It remembers the word maybe. It remembers the word never. It remembers your face. It remembers your voice. It remembers the life that did not happen. And because it remembers, it continues to ache. This is why some people can never fully move on from what was never spoken. The story was never completed. The chapter was never closed with truth. It ended in suggestion, not resolution. And the psyche hates unresolved endings. The unconscious loops around them again and again, trying to finish what consciousness lacked the courage to begin. There is a lesson here for every heart in this room. Do not wait forever for the perfect moment to tell the truth. There may never be a perfect moment. There may only be a trembling moment, a fragile moment, a human moment. Speak before silence turns your love into regret. Speak before fear turns your tenderness into a memory. Speak before the person you love becomes the person you only mourn. Because one day you may realize that the pain of not saying it was greater than the pain of hearing no. And that realization is devastating. Not every confession will be welcomed. Not every love will be returned. Not every truth will be rewarded. But a life built on honesty is still more valuable than a life built on concealed longing. There is dignity in expression, even when it is rejected. There is nobility in vulnerability, even when it is not met with reciprocity. There is freedom in telling the truth, even if the truth does not save the relationship. Because at least then, the soul is no longer split. At least then, the inner world and the outer world can finally meet. At least then, you are not forced to wonder for the rest of your life what might have happened if you had been brave. And bravery, ladies and gentlemen, is not the absence of fear. Bravery is speaking while fear is still present. Bravery is opening your heart while your hands are shaking. Bravery is saying what matters before time takes the chance away. The tragedy of unspoken love is that it often begins with a noble intention. I do not want to disturb them. I do not want to make things awkward. I do not want to lose them. I do not want to be a burden. But over time, noble intention can become self-erasure, and when a person erases themselves long enough, they begin to forget the sound of their own truth. That is when the soul starts to mourn itself. So tonight, remember this. Every silent love carries a hidden history. Every quiet longing has a reason. Every unfinished confession reveals something about the human condition. We are creatures of desire, yes, but also creatures of fear. We want closeness, yet we tremble when it comes near. We hunger for being seen, yet we hide what is most real. We crave intimacy, yet we build walls around our own hearts. This is the great contradiction of life. We spend so much of it waiting to feel safe enough to be honest, and in doing so, we may spend our best years in emotional exile. We may admire from afar, cherish in secret, and lose in silence. But the truth remains. What is real in the heart does not vanish simply because it was not spoken. It lives on. It shapes the soul. It leaves traces in behavior, memory, and destiny. So when someone could never say they loved you, understand that their silence may have been a battlefield. Understand that their eyes may have spoken what their mouth denied. Understand that their withdrawal may have been protection, not indifference. Understand that people are often more divided within themselves than they ever let the world see. And understand this as well. Being loved silently is still being loved. It is not the full gift. It is not the clean truth. It is not the peace that open love can bring. But it is real. And sometimes reality arrives in broken forms. Sometimes love does not come wearing the costume we expected. Sometimes it comes as restraint, as hesitation, as unfinished words, as a heart that never learned how to become audible. But no matter how hidden it was, the feeling was there. The feeling was there when they saw you. The feeling was there when they left. The feeling was there when they remembered. The feeling was there when they stayed awake, thinking of you. The feeling was there when they said nothing. And perhaps that is the message this title carries for every wounded heart listening tonight. Do not confuse silence with emptiness. Do not confuse restraint with lack. Do not confuse fear with indifference. The human heart is far more complicated than that. It can love and hide at the same time. It can long and retreat at the same time. It can burn and remain still at the same time. That is why some people never say it. Not because they did not feel it, but because the feeling was so strong it frightened them into silence. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the oldest tragedies in the world. They loved you, but could never say it. And the soul, hearing that truth, must decide what to do with the silence. Will it become bitterness? Will it become wisdom? Will it become regret? Or will it become understanding? Choose understanding, because understanding is the beginning of healing. And healing begins when we finally admit that the hearts who never spoke may still have loved us more than we ever knew.